The flames danced higher as I fed another document into the fire pit. Marriage license. Wedding venue contract. Honeymoon reservations. Each paper curled and blackened, taking with it 7 years of what I thought was love. Marcus stood behind me, his voice cracking as he begged me to stop, but I couldn't hear him over the sound of my world crashing down. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 hours earlier, I'd discovered that our entire mortgage payment for the last 6 months, every penny we'd saved for our dream home in Portland's Hawthorne district, had been transferred to Derek Walsh's tech startup. Derek, the man who'd broken my fiancé's heart 5 years ago and apparently still owned it. The morning of October 15th started like any other Tuesday. I was reviewing fabric samples for the Henderson project at Bloom & Cobertsay, my interior design studio in Portland's Arts District, when my phone buzzed with a notification from our bank. At first I thought it was just a routine balance update, but the number made my coffee mug slip from my hands, sending ceramic shards across my desk. Our joint savings account, which should have contained $48,000 for our house down payment, showed a balance of $327. My hands trembled as I called the bank, certain there had been some mistake. The customer service representative, speaking in that practiced tone of professional sympathy, confirmed my worst fears. 6 separate transfers had been made over the past 4 months, all authorized by Marcus Thompson, my fiancé of 7 years. The largest transfer, for $18,000, had gone through just yesterday to something called Innovation Edge Solutions, LLC. I hung up and stared at the rain streaking down my studio windows, watching the October storm turn Portland's usually vibrant streets into a gray watercolor painting. Marcus was supposed to be at a construction site meeting for his real estate development company. We were supposed to sign the papers for our dream craftsman house on Thursday. We were supposed to be planning our December wedding. Instead, I found myself driving through the rain to Innovation Edge Solutions office in the Pearl District, my heart hammering against my ribs with each traffic light. The address led me to a sleek glass building that screamed startup culture. The lobby was all exposed brick and industrial lighting, filled with the kind of people who wore sneakers with their business casual and spoke in buzzwords about disrupting industries. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled purple hair, smiled brightly when I asked about Derek Walsh. "Oh, Derek's in the collaborative workspace on the 3rd floor. Are you here for the investor presentation?" Investor presentation. The words hit me like ice water. I took the elevator up, my reflection in the polished steel doors, showing a woman I barely recognized. My usually neat brown hair was disheveled from the rain, and my green eyes held a wildness I'd never seen before. At 29, I'd built my design business from nothing, earned my clients' trust through careful planning and honest communication. I wasn't the type of person who showed up unannounced at offices, demanding answers. But then again, I'd never had my entire future stolen from me before. The 3rd floor was an open-concept workspace with glass conference rooms scattered throughout. Through the transparent walls of the largest room, I could see Derek Walsh presenting to a group of suited investors. He looked exactly the same as he had 5 years ago, when Marcus would show me pictures on his phone, back when they were still friends. Still had that easy confidence, the kind of smile that made people want to give him things. Dark hair perfectly styled, expensive watch catching the light as he gestured at charts and graphs on a massive screen. And there, sitting at the conference table like he belonged there, was Marcus. My Marcus, wearing the navy suit I'd helped him pick out for important meetings, nodding along as Derek spoke about market penetration and user acquisition. My Marcus, who'd been lying to me for months, sitting in a room full of investors while our mortgage payment funded whatever dream Derek was selling this time. I pushed through the glass door without knocking. The presentation stopped mid-sentence, and every head in the room turned toward me. Derek's confident smile faltered when he saw my face, but it was Marcus's expression that told me everything I needed to know. Guilt, panic, and something else. Relief, maybe. That the secret was finally out. "Lily," Marcus said, standing so quickly his chair rolled backward. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Especially since you're supposed to be at the Morrison site today, not sitting in on investor meetings for companies we're apparently funding. The room had gone completely silent. I could feel the investors' curious stares, smell the expensive cologne and fresh coffee that seemed to permeate every startup office in Portland. Derek cleared his throat, that practiced charm sliding back into place. Lily Rodriguez, right? Marcus has told me so much about you. Your design work is incredible. I've seen the photos of the Riverside Lofts project. Really impressive stuff. The casual way he spoke my name, like we were old friends, made my skin crawl. Cut the flattery, Derek. I want to know why $47,000 of my money is sitting in your business account. Marcus stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture that I'd seen him use with difficult clients. Lily, please, let's not do this here. We can talk about this at home. No, Marcus. We're going to talk about this right here, right now. I turned to face the room full of investors who were watching this domestic drama unfold like it was premium entertainment. Did you all know that the money funding this presentation was stolen from a mortgage account? That Marcus here has been lying to his fiancé for months while he played venture capitalist with money that wasn't his to give? One of the investors, an older man with silver hair and a Rolex, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Perhaps we should reschedule this meeting. That's probably wise, Derek said smoothly, but his eyes never left mine. There was something calculating in his gaze, like he was trying to figure out how much damage I could do to his carefully constructed presentation. Marcus, why don't you and Lily step into my private office so you can work this out? The private office was a glass box in the corner, offering the illusion of privacy while keeping us visible to the entire floor. Marcus closed the door behind us and immediately launched into what sounded like a rehearsed speech. Lily, I know this looks bad, but I can explain everything. Derek came to me 3 months ago with this incredible opportunity. The app they're developing, it's going to revolutionize how people buy and sell real estate. I saw the potential immediately, and I knew that if we got in on the ground floor, we could make enough money to buy the house outright. Maybe even expand your business. I stared at him. This man I'd planned to marry in 8 weeks, and felt like I was looking at a stranger. So you decided to gamble our entire future without telling me? You took the money we've been saving for 3 years and gave it to your ex-boyfriend without even discussing it with me? Derek's not my ex-boyfriend, Marcus said quickly. You know that. We were never together like that. But I'd seen the way Marcus's face changed whenever Derek's name came up in conversation. Over the years, I'd noticed how he'd kept track of Derek's various business ventures, always speaking about them with a mixture of admiration and longing. I'd watched him light up when Derek moved back to Portland 18 months ago, claiming he was excited to reconnect with an old friend. Maybe not officially, I said. But you've been in love with him since college, and now you've proven that he matters more to you than I do. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Through the glass walls, I could see Derek had dismissed the investors and was now standing just outside the office, pretending to look at his phone while clearly listening to every word. The workspace had mostly emptied, leaving just a few dedicated employees typing away at their laptops, but I could feel their curious glances. Marcus ran his hands through his sandy brown hair, a nervous habit I'd found endearing for 7 years. Now it just made me angry. That's not true, Lily. You're the most important thing in my life. This investment, it was for us. For our future. Our future! I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Marcus, we were supposed to sign papers for our house on Thursday. Our wedding is in 8 weeks. I've already paid the caterer, the photographer, the florist. How exactly did you plan to explain that we suddenly couldn't afford our down payment? He looked away, focusing on something outside the window. Derek promised the first investor payout would come through by the end of the month, enough to cover the house and still leave us with profit. I was going to surprise you. Surprise me. I repeated the words slowly, tasting the bitterness. You were going to surprise me by gambling away everything we'd worked for. Derek chose that moment to knock on the glass door. Sorry to interrupt, but I think there might be a misunderstanding here. He stepped into the office without waiting for permission, carrying himself with the kind of confidence that came from years of convincing people to give him money. Lily, I want you to know that every dollar Marcus invested is completely secure. Innovation Edge isn't just another startup. We've got backing from some of the most respected venture capital firms on the West Coast. I looked between the two men, Marcus with his guilty expression, and Derek with his practiced sincerity, and felt something cold settle in my chest. If you're so well-funded, why do you need money from individual investors? Why do you need Marcus's money specifically? Derek's smile never wavered, but I caught the quick glance he exchanged with Marcus. Well, we're always looking for strategic partners who understand the real estate market. Marcus brings invaluable industry insight to our team. Strategic partners, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it? The silence stretched between us until Marcus finally spoke up. Lily, Derek offered me a position on the advisory board. If the company goes public like they're projecting, the shares alone will be worth more than my entire real estate business. And there it was. The real reason Marcus had been willing to risk everything we'd built together. Derek wasn't just offering him an investment opportunity. He was offering him a chance to be important, to be part of something bigger than flipping houses in Portland. He was offering Marcus a future where he could matter to someone who'd never really seen him as more than a convenience. I pulled out my phone and opened our banking app, showing Marcus the screen. Do you see this balance? $327. That's what's left of our life together. That's what you decided our relationship was worth. Marcus reached for me, but I stepped back. Lily, please, give me 1 month, just 1 month to prove that this was the right decision. If the returns aren't what Derek promised, I'll find a way to get every penny back. 1 month, I said quietly. You want me to wait 1 month to find out if we can afford the life we planned together. You want me to trust the man who just lied to me for 4 months to suddenly start telling the truth. Derek cleared his throat. Actually, I think there might be a way to resolve this that works for everyone. Lily, your design business has an excellent reputation in Portland. Innovation Edge is planning to expand into commercial real estate development within the next year. We could use someone with your expertise as a consultant. The offer hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Derek was trying to buy my silence, to make me complicit in whatever game he was playing with Marcus, and from the hopeful look on Marcus's face, he thought this was actually a solution. You want to hire me, I said slowly, to design spaces, for a company that's funded with my own stolen money. Not stolen, Derek said quickly. Invested. There's a significant difference. I looked at Marcus one more time, searching his face for any sign of the man I'd fallen in love with 7 years ago. The man who'd supported my decision to start my own business, who'd held me when I cried over difficult clients, who'd promised me that we'd build something beautiful together. Instead, I saw someone who'd been willing to throw away everything we'd worked for because Derek Walsh had smiled at him and made him feel special. I'm done, I said simply. The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment before Marcus registered what I meant. Done with what? Done with this conversation? Done with you. Done with us. Done pretending that I matter to you when it's obvious I never have. I turned to leave, but Marcus grabbed my arm. Lily, wait. You can't just walk away from 7 years because of one mistake. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. One mistake? Marcus, you didn't accidentally transfer our mortgage money to Derek's account. You made a deliberate choice, over and over again for 4 months. You chose him over me every single time. That's not true, he said desperately. I love you. I want to marry you. No, I said, gently pulling my arm free. You love the idea of me. You love having someone stable and reliable to come home to while you chase whatever shiny object Derek waves in front of you. But you don't love me enough to respect me or trust me or include me in decisions that affect my entire life. Through the glass walls, I could see that the few remaining employees had given up any pretense of working and were openly watching our drama unfold. In 8 weeks, these same people would probably be reading about our canceled wedding in the local paper's society section. Derek stepped forward, his voice taking on that persuasive tone I'd heard him use with the investors. Lily, I think you're making an emotional decision here. Maybe you should take some time to think about this. Rationally. The condescension in his voice was the final straw. I turned to face him fully, and whatever he saw in my expression made him take a step back. Rationally? I said, my voice deadly calm. Let me think about this rationally. You convinced my fiancé to steal money from our joint account to fund your vanity project. You're offering me work as a consultant for a company that exists only because you're good at manipulating people who care about you. And now you're telling me that being upset about financial fraud is an emotional overreaction. It's not fraud, Derek said quickly. Marcus had full access to that account. Legal access, maybe, but not moral authority. I looked back at Marcus, who was still standing there with that lost expression, like he couldn't understand how his perfect plan had gone so wrong. I'll be back tonight to get my things. I want you out of the house by Friday. Lily, please, Marcus said, his voice breaking. Don't do this. We can work through this. But I was already walking away, my heels clicking against the polished, concrete floor of the startup space. Behind me, I could hear Derek's voice, low and urgent, probably trying to convince Marcus that this was just a temporary setback, that I'd come around once I calmed down. They had no idea that I was just getting started. The elevator ride down felt like the longest 2 minutes of my life. When the doors opened in the lobby, I walked straight past the purple-haired receptionist and out into the October rain, letting it wash over me like a baptism. My phone was already buzzing with calls from Marcus, but I turned it off and dropped it into my purse. For 7 years, I'd built my life around the assumption that Marcus and I were partners, that we were working toward the same goals with the same values. I'd trusted him with my heart, my business, my financial future. I'd planned to promise him forever in 8 weeks. Instead, I'd discovered that I'd been living with a stranger who was willing to gamble away everything we'd built for a chance, to impress someone who'd never really wanted him in the first place. As I drove back to Bloom & Co. through the rain-soaked streets of Portland, I made a mental list of everything that would need to be undone. Wedding venue, caterer, photographer, florist, honeymoon reservations, marriage license, 7 years of shared plans, shared dreams, shared finances that would all need to be untangled. But first, I had a bonfire to plan. The fire pit in our backyard had been Marcus's idea 2 summers ago. He'd spent 3 weekends arranging the river stones just right, proud of his handiwork as we roasted marshmallows and talked about our future. Now I stood beside it with a box of matches, feeding our entire relationship into the flames 1 document at a time. The marriage license was first. I watched our signatures curl and blacken, the official seal of Multnomah County dissolving into ash. Next came the venue contract for the historic Pittock Mansion, where we'd planned to exchange vows overlooking the city skyline. The deposit had been non-refundable, but watching those papers burn felt more satisfying than any wedding could have. Marcus pulled into the driveway, just as I was adding our honeymoon reservations to the flames. The Tuscany itinerary we'd spent months planning, complete with wine tours and cooking classes, turned to smoke in seconds. I heard his car door slam, his footsteps rushing across the wet grass, but I didn't turn around. Lily, what are you doing? His voice cracked with panic as he saw the growing pile of ashes. Those are legal documents. You can't just burn them. Watch me, I said, pulling out the wedding insurance policy. The irony wasn't lost on me that we'd bought insurance to protect against venue cancellations and vendor failures, but there was no coverage for groom commits financial fraud. Stop, please. Marcus lunged forward, trying to grab the papers from my hands, but I'd already tossed them into the fire. Lily, we can fix this. I can get the money back. Derek said if there's any problem with the investment, he'll cover the shortfall personally. I finally turned to face him, and he stepped back at whatever he saw in my expression. Derek said that? The same Derek who's been feeding you lies for months? The same Derek who convinced you that stealing from your fiancé was a sound business strategy? I didn't steal anything, Marcus said desperately. It was our money. Both our names are on that account. My name might be on the account, but it was my clients who paid those invoices. My late nights and weekend work that built up that balance. My sacrifice when I chose to save money instead of expanding my studio. I pulled out our joint credit card statements, each one representing another month of careful budgeting and shared goals. Every dinner we didn't go to, every vacation we postponed, every time I bought supplies for the business instead of new clothes for myself. All of it so we could have this house, this wedding, this life together. The credit card statements. caught fire quickly, the flames dancing higher as years of financial planning turned to ash. Marcus stood there helplessly, watching our documented history disappear. "I thought I was investing in our future," he said quietly. Derek showed me the projections, the market research. "This app is going to be huge, Lily. When it goes public, we'll have enough money to buy any house we want." "When it goes public," I repeated. How many times has Derek told you something was going to be huge? How many of his brilliant ideas have actually succeeded? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at the fire. "This is different. He's learned from his past mistakes." Has he? Or has he just learned how to be more convincing when he lies? I reached into the box for our wedding planning folder, thick with vendor contracts and timeline spreadsheets. "Tell me something, Marcus. When Derek asked you for the money, did he mention that Innovation Edge is already facing a lawsuit from their previous investors?" The expression on Marcus's face told me he had no idea what I was talking about. While he'd been sitting in investor meetings, I'd spent the afternoon doing research. A simple Google search had revealed that Derek's company had been sued 6 months ago by early investors who claimed he'd misrepresented the app's development timeline and market potential. That lawsuit was frivolous, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Derek explained it to me. Disgruntled investors who didn't understand the development process. Disgruntled investors who discovered that the revolutionary app they'd funded was actually just a basic property listing platform that already existed in a dozen different forms. I fed the catering contract into the flames, watching the menu we'd carefully selected turn to ash. Did Derek happen to mention that 3 of his key developers quit last month? Or that the patent application he's been bragging about was rejected by the USPTO? Marcus stared at me, his face pale in the firelight. "How do you know all this?" "Because unlike you, I believe in doing research before making major financial decisions." The florist contract went into the fire next, along with all our discussions about seasonal flowers and color schemes. It took me exactly 47 minutes to find out that your brilliant investment opportunity is a sinking ship held together by Derek's charm and other people's money. "You're wrong," Marcus said, but he didn't sound sure anymore. Derek wouldn't lie to me about something this important. I almost felt sorry for him in that moment. After all these years, he still couldn't see what was right in front of him. Derek had always been good at making people believe in him, at painting himself as the misunderstood visionary who just needed the right support to change the world. And Marcus, loyal and trusting Marcus, had always been the perfect Mark. "Marcus," I said gently, "Derek has been lying to you since college. Remember when he convinced you to co-sign that lease for the apartment he never paid rent on? Or when he borrowed your car and returned it with a cracked windshield and an empty gas tank? Or when he forgot to pay you back the $2,000 you lent him for his first business venture?" "Those were different situations," Marcus protested, but his voice was getting smaller. "We were young. People make mistakes." "People do make mistakes," I agreed, adding our photographer's contract to the fire. "But patterns aren't mistakes. They're choices." I looked at him across the dancing flames, this man I'd planned to spend my life with, and felt a profound sadness settle over me. "The real tragedy isn't that Derek lied to you. It's that you were so eager to believe him that you didn't even consider what it would cost me." Marcus took a step closer, his eyes pleading. "I never meant to hurt you. I thought I was protecting our future. By excluding me from decisions about my own money, by lying to me for months, by choosing Derek's word over my trust." I shook my head. "That's not protection, Marcus. That's betrayal." The wedding dress preservation box came. Out next, still sealed from when I'd had my grandmother's dress cleaned and stored. I'd planned to wear it at our ceremony, carrying on a family tradition that stretched back 3 generations. Now I held the box over the flames, feeling the weight of all those broken promises. "Not the dress," Marcus whispered. "Please, Lily. That's your grandmother's dress. It's irreplaceable." He was right. The dress was irreplaceable, just like the trust he'd shattered. I set the box aside and reached for something else instead. Our shared calendar where we'd marked important dates, wedding dress fitting, cake tasting, bachelor and bachelorette parties, all leading up to December 15th, the day we'd planned to promise each other forever. You know what the worst part is? I said, watching our carefully planned timeline disappear into smoke. It's not even the money. Money can be replaced. It's that you made me feel crazy for the past 4 months. Marcus frowned. What do you mean? Every time I mentioned feeling disconnected from you, you told me I was being paranoid. Every time I suggested we review our finances together, you found an excuse to postpone it. Every time I felt like something was wrong, you made me believe the problem was with me. The tears finally came, but they felt cleansing rather than sad. You gaslighted me for months while you lived this secret life with Derek, and I actually started believing that I was the problem. I never meant to make you feel that way, Marcus said desperately. I was trying to protect you from the stress. I knew you'd worry about the investment. Of course I would have worried about it. Any rational person would worry about gambling, away their life savings on a tech startup with a track record of failure. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, leaving streaks of ash on my cheeks. But you didn't want my rational input. You wanted my blind faith. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant sound of traffic on Hawthorne Boulevard. Our neighbors' houses glowed with warm light, families settling in for cozy October evenings, probably discussing their days over dinner or helping kids with homework. Normal people living normal lives that didn't include financial fraud and burning wedding documents. So what happens now? Marcus asked finally. I looked at the pile of ashes in the fire pit, then at the man I'd planned to marry, and realized I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even disappointment. Just a strange sense of relief, like I'd been holding my breath for months and could finally exhale. Now you pack your things and find somewhere else to live, I said calmly. The house is in my name, bought with money from my business. I'll be filing paperwork tomorrow to remove you from all our joint accounts, and I expect you to find your own place by Friday. Lily, please. We can work through this. I'll get the money back, I promise. I'll make Derek understand that this was a mistake. The mistake wasn't the investment, Marcus. The mistake was thinking that you and I wanted the same things. Kicked dirt over the fire, watching the flames die down to glowing embers. You want to chase Derek's dreams and pretend they're your own. I want to build something real with someone who respects me enough to include me in major decisions. Marcus stood there in the growing darkness, looking lost and confused, like he couldn't understand how his perfect plan had unraveled so quickly. What about our friends? Our families? Everyone's expecting a wedding. Then I guess everyone's going to be disappointed. I picked up the empty box that had held our relationship documents and started walking toward the house. I'll handle the cancellations. You can handle the explanations. Lily, wait. Marcus followed me to the back door, his voice desperate. I love you. I want to marry you. Doesn't that count for anything? I stopped with my hand on the doorknob, looking back at him one last time. Marcus, you've spent the last 4 months lying to me, stealing from me, and choosing another man over me. If that's what you call love, then I don't want any part of it. Inside the house, everything looked the same as it had that morning, but it all felt different now. The kitchen where we'd cooked breakfast together, the living room where we'd planned our wedding, the bedroom where we'd talked about our future, all of it contaminated by the knowledge of his betrayal. I walked through the rooms systematically, gathering up any reminders of our relationship and dropping them into garbage bags. Wedding magazines, engagement photos, greeting cards he'd given me over the years, all of it went into the bags. I wasn't being cruel or vindictive. I just needed it gone. Needed to reclaim my space from the ghost of what we'd been. My phone had been buzzing constantly since I'd left Derek's office, but I'd been ignoring it. Now I finally pulled it out and saw 17 missed calls from Marcus, 12 text messages, and 3 voicemails. There were also missed calls from my business partner Amanda Chen and my assistant Rachel Kim, probably wondering why I disappeared in the middle of the workday. The first voicemail was Marcus, recorded right after I'd left the Innovation Edge office. His voice was shaky, almost panicked. Lily, please call me back. We need to talk about this rationally. Derek has some ideas about how to fix this situation, and I think you'll be interested in what he has to offer. Derek has some ideas. Even in crisis, Marcus was still looking to Derek for solutions. The second voicemail was from 2 hours later. Marcus's voice more composed but underlying tension obvious. Lily, I talked to Derek about getting the money back immediately. He's willing to return the full amount, but it might take a few weeks to liquidate some assets. We can still make this work. Please don't do anything rash. The third voicemail had been left just 20 minutes ago, while I was burning our wedding documents. This time, Marcus sounded desperate. Lily, I know you're upset, but destroying our marriage license won't solve anything. We can get a new one. We can postpone the wedding if you need time to process this. Just please don't throw away 7 years over one mistake. One mistake. He was still calling it one mistake. I deleted all the voicemails without listening to the text messages and called Amanda instead. She answered on the second ring, her voice immediately concerned. Lily, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all afternoon. Rachel said you left the studio in a hurry and haven't been answering your phone. Is everything okay? Amanda Chen had been my business partner for 3 years, since I'd expanded Bloom & Co., and needed someone to handle the commercial projects while I focused on residential design. She was brilliant, organized, and completely trustworthy, everything Marcus had pretended to be. Everything's not okay, I said, sinking onto my couch with the phone pressed to my ear. Marcus stole our mortgage money to invest in Derek Walsh's startup. I found out this afternoon. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Amanda spoke, her voice carefully controlled. How much money are we talking about? $47,000. Everything we'd saved for the house down payment. Jesus, Lily, are you serious? Dead serious. I caught him at an investor presentation for Innovation Edge Solutions, sitting there like he belonged, while Derek pitched their revolutionary app to a room full of suits. I leaned back against the couch cushions, suddenly exhausted. The wedding's off. I burned the marriage license tonight. You burned it? Like, actually set it on fire? Along with every other wedding document I could find. Venue contract, catering agreement, honeymoon reservations, all of it. I closed my eyes, trying to process everything that had happened, in the span of 8 hours. This morning I'd been a woman planning her December wedding. Tonight I was single, financially devastated, and homeless since I'd kicked Marcus out of my own house. Okay, Amanda said, her voice switching into business mode. First question. Do you have somewhere to stay tonight? Because if Marcus is as shaken up as he should be, he might do something stupid. I hadn't thought about that. Marcus wasn't violent, but he was definitely unpredictable when he was stressed, and losing a 7-year relationship definitely qualified as stressful. I'm staying here tonight. It's my house. Are you sure that's wise? What if he comes back with Derek? What if they try to convince you to change your mind? The thought of facing both Marcus and Derek tonight made my stomach turn. I was emotionally drained, financially devastated, and in no condition to withstand another round of manipulation and false promises. You're right, I said. I should probably get out of here for the night. Come stay with me and James. We've got the guest room set up and I'll make us some dinner while you figure out your next steps. Amanda's voice was warm and supportive, reminding me why I'd chosen her as a business partner. Bring whatever you need for tonight and tomorrow. We can deal with the rest later. After I hung up, I packed an overnight bag and looked around the house one more time. 7 years of shared memories surrounded me. The kitchen table we'd bought together, the artwork we'd chosen for the walls, the coffee maker he'd given me for my birthday 2 years ago. Everything would need to be divided or replaced. Another layer of complexity in the dissolution of our relationship. As I was loading my bag into the car, I heard Marcus's truck turning into the driveway. I quickly backed out before he could block me in, but I caught a glimpse of his face in my rearview mirror. He looked desperate and confused, like a man who'd just realized that actions had consequences. My phone started ringing before I'd even reached the end of our street. Marcus again. I declined the call and turned off my phone, needing the silence to process everything that had happened. Amanda and James lived in a renovated bungalow in the Belmont district, just 15 minutes from my house, but far enough to feel like a different world. Their home was warm and welcoming, filled with the kind of comfortable clutter that came from two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. James greeted me at the door with a hug and a glass of wine, while Amanda bustled around the kitchen, making grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. Comfort food, she explained, setting a steaming bowl in front of me. My mom's recipe. It fixes everything except broken hearts and bad investments. We ate in relative silence, James giving me space to process while Amanda filled the quiet with updates about our current projects. The normalcy of it was soothing, a reminder that life would continue even if my personal world had imploded. After dinner, Amanda and I sat on her back porch with another bottle of wine, watching the October stars appear through the Portland clouds. The night air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke from someone's fireplace. "So what's your plan?" Amanda asked gently. "I don't have one yet," I admitted. "This morning I was planning a wedding and buying a house. Tonight I'm single and homeless and financially ruined. I need some time to figure out what comes next." "You're not homeless," Amanda said firmly. "You can stay here as long as you need to. And you're not financially ruined either. Bloom & Co. is doing well, and your personal savings account is separate from the joint account, right?" I nodded. I'd always been careful to maintain some financial independence, a lesson learned from watching my mother struggle after my father left. My personal account had about $12,000, enough to cover basic expenses for a few months, but nowhere near enough to replace what Marcus had stolen. "The real question," Amanda continued, "is whether you're going to try to get the money back." I'd been avoiding thinking about that particular problem. Technically, Marcus had legal access to the joint account, which meant proving theft would be difficult. And even if I could prove it, Derek's company was probably judgment-proof. Startup assets were notoriously difficult to recover. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe. But right now, I just want to focus on moving forward." Amanda studied my face in the dim porch light. "You know, this might actually be the best thing that ever happened to you." I nearly choked on my wine. "Excuse me? Think about it, Lily. You've been planning this wedding for months, but every time we talked about it, you seemed more stressed than excited. You kept talking about all the things you had to do, all the expectations you had to meet, but you never talked about how happy you were to be marrying Marcus." She was right, and I hated that she was right. For months, I'd been going through the motions of wedding planning, checking items off lists and making decisions about flowers and music, but I hadn't felt the joy that was supposed to come with preparing to marry the love of your life. "I thought I was just stressed about the logistics," I said quietly. "Maybe. Or maybe some part of you already knew that Marcus wasn't the right person for you." Amanda reached over and squeezed my hand. 7 years is a long time, but it's not worth spending the rest of your life with someone who doesn't respect you enough to include you in major decisions. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. Dogs barking, televisions murmuring through open windows, the distant hum of traffic on Belmont Avenue. Normal people living normal lives, problems and all. "I keep thinking about what he said," I finally admitted. "About protecting me from stress, about trying to invest in our future. Part of me wonders if I'm being too harsh." "Lily," Amanda said firmly, "he spent $47,000 of your money without telling you. That's not protection. That's control. And the fact that he did it to impress Derek makes it even worse." She was right about Derek, too. I'd always sensed that Marcus's feelings for his old friend went deeper than simple friendship, but I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid. Now I wondered how long Derek had been pulling Marcus's strings, how many of our relationship problems could be traced back to Derek's influence. "I think I need to take some time away from Portland," said suddenly. "Clear my head, figure out what I want to do next." "That sounds like a good idea. Where are you thinking?" "I don't know yet. Somewhere different. Somewhere I can start fresh." I looked up at the stars, barely visible through the city's light pollution. "Maybe it's time to find out who I am when I'm not Marcus's fiancé." Amanda smiled. "Now, that sounds like the Lily I know. The woman who started her own business at 25 and built it into one of Portland's most respected design firms. The woman who doesn't need anyone else to define her worth." As we headed inside for the night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not for reconciliation with Marcus, not for recovering the stolen money, but for the possibility of building something new and better from the ashes of my old life. Tomorrow I would start the process of untangling 7 years of shared finances and possessions. I would call vendors and cancel contracts and probably lose thousands of dollars in deposits. I would face the embarrassment of explaining to family and friends that the wedding was off because the groom was a liar and a thief. But tonight, for the first time in months, I was free. The Greyhound station in Austin smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams, but it was exactly what I needed. 3 weeks after burning my marriage license, I stood in line with a single suitcase and a bank account that had dwindled to $8,000. Portland felt like a prison now, every street corner holding memories of Marcus and our failed relationship. I needed distance, anonymity, and the chance to figure out who Lily Rodriguez was when she wasn't planning someone else's wedding. Amanda had tried to convince me to stay, offering me the guest room indefinitely and promising that Blumenkoers could survive my absence. But every morning I'd wake up in her house and feel like I was imposing, like I was hiding from my problems instead of solving them. When I'd found a Craigslist ad for a sublet in Austin's East Side, something about the city's reputation for reinvention had called to me. The apartment was a studio above a vintage clothing store, just 600 square feet of exposed brick and questionable plumbing. The landlord, a woman named Rosa with purple streaks in her gray hair, had shown it to me over FaceTime with the caveat that the previous tenant had left suddenly, abandoning most of his furniture. "It's not much to look at," Rosa had admitted, panning her phone across the cramped space. "But it's got character, and the rent includes utilities, which is practically unheard of in this neighborhood." Character turned out to be a generous description. The studio came furnished with a futon that had seen better decades, a kitchenette that consisted of 2 burners and a mini-fridge, and a bathroom so small I had to step into the shower to close the door. But it was mine, at least for the next 6 months, and that was enough. My first week in Austin was a blur of basic survival tasks: finding a grocery store, learning the bus routes, figuring out which coffee shops had reliable Wi-Fi. I'd closed Blumenko temporarily, telling my clients that I was taking a sabbatical for personal reasons. Amanda was handling the ongoing projects, and I'd signed over temporary power of attorney so she could make decisions in my absence. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness or the financial stress. It was the complete absence of purpose. For 7 years, my identity had been split between being Marcus's partner and running my business. Now I was neither engaged nor employed, just another transplant wandering around Austin trying to figure out what came next. I spent my days walking through different neighborhoods, observing the city's unique blend of historic architecture and modern development. Austin was in the middle of a construction boom, with sleek condos rising next to century-old bungalows, tech company offices sharing blocks with taco trucks and vintage boutiques. The energy was infectious, all these people chasing dreams and building something new. It was during one of these wandering sessions that I stumbled into the East Side Community Market, a weekly gathering of local artisans, food vendors, and musicians. The whole thing was organized around a converted warehouse that housed makerspaces and artist studios. I was browsing handmade jewelry when a voice behind me said, "You're not from here." I turned to find a man about my age with paint-stained fingers and an easy smile. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that looked like he cut it himself, and brown eyes that seemed genuinely interested in my answer. "Is it that obvious?" I asked. "The way you're looking around, like you're trying to memorize everything. Locals take this stuff for granted." He gestured toward the bustling market around us. "I'm Brandon Foster. I run a design studio upstairs." "Lily Rodriguez," I said, shaking his paint-stained hand. "And you're right. I'm not from here." "Portland? Originally. What brought you to Austin?" It was a simple question, but I found myself hesitating. How do you explain to a stranger that you're running away from 7 years of lies? That you've moved across the country because you discovered your fiancé was more in love with his ex than he was with you? "Change of scenery," I said finally. I needed to get out of my comfort zone. Brandon nodded like that made perfect sense. "Austin's good for that. What kind of work do you do?" "Interior design, or I did anyway. I'm kind of between projects right now." His eyes lit up with interest. "No kidding. What's your specialty?" "Residential mostly, some commercial. I had my own firm in Portland." I realized I was speaking about Blumenko in past tense, like it was already dead instead of just dormant. Had. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. It's complicated. Brandon studied my face for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. Want to see something cool? I think you might appreciate it from a design perspective. He led me through the warehouse to a freight elevator that groaned and shuddered its way to the third floor. The doors opened onto a space that took my breath away. What had once been a factory floor was now divided into artist studios, each one separated by glass partitions that maintained the open feel while providing privacy. Natural light poured in through massive windows, illuminating everything from sculpture studios to photography darkrooms. "This is incredible," I said, walking along the central corridor and peering into the different spaces. "How long has this been here?" The artist collective started about 5 years ago. The building was scheduled for demolition, but a group of local creatives convinced the city to let us lease it instead. Brandon unlocked one of the studio doors and gestured for me to follow him inside. "This is mine." His studio was chaos in the best possible way. Canvases covered every available wall space, some finished paintings and others works in progress. Tables overflowed with brushes, paint tubes, and sketches. In one corner, architectural drawings were tacked to a drafting table, and I could see building plans mixed in with artistic renderings. "You're an architect too?" I asked, examining the technical drawings. "Sustainable architecture specifically. The art pays the bills while I work on my real passion, which is designing affordable housing that doesn't look like a concrete prison." He picked up one of the architectural renderings, a beautiful sketch of what looked like a small apartment complex surrounded by gardens. "Most low-income housing is designed by people who will never have to live in it. I want to change that." I studied the drawing more closely, noting the way he'd incorporated natural light and green space into a compact design. "This is brilliant. Have you built any of these?" "Not yet. I'm still working on funding and permits, all the boring stuff that comes before the actual building." Brandon set the drawing aside and turned to face me. "What about you? What kind of projects were you working on in Portland?" Something about his genuine curiosity made me want to open up, to talk about design theory and creative challenges, instead of failed relationships and stolen money. I found myself describing some of my favorite projects from Bloom & Co. The way I'd transformed a cramped Victorian into an open, light-filled family home. The office space I designed for a nonprofit that needed to feel both professional and welcoming. "You have a gift for spatial relationships," Brandon said when I finished describing the Victorian renovation. "That's not something you can teach. You either see how spaces connect to each other, or you don't." "Thank you," I said, surprised by how much his praise meant to me. It had been months since anyone had talked to me about my work as if it mattered. We spent the next hour walking through the warehouse, Brandon introducing me to other artists and explaining the collective's mission. Everyone seemed to know each other, creating the kind of creative community I'd always dreamed about but never found in Portland's more competitive design scene. "We have an empty studio on the second floor," Brandon mentioned as we headed back toward the elevator. "The potter who was renting it moved to California last month. If you're interested in doing some design work while you're in Austin, it might be perfect for you." "I'm not sure I'm ready to start working again," I said, though the idea was tempting. "I'm still figuring some things out. No pressure, but creative work can be good therapy. And the rent's cheap, even by Austin standards." That night, back in my tiny studio apartment, I found myself sketching for the first time in weeks. Nothing specific, just ideas and spatial relationships. The kind of doodling I'd done as a design student before clients and budgets and Marcus's opinions had started shaping my work. There was something liberating about drawing without purpose, creating without having to justify every decision to someone else. I'd been avoiding social media since leaving Portland, but curiosity finally got the better of me. I opened Instagram and immediately regretted it. Marcus had posted a photo of himself and Derek at some industry event, both of them smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. The caption read, "Excited to announce that Innovation Edge Solutions has secured Series A funding. Here's to building the future of real estate technology." The comments were full of congratulations and heart emojis, people who had no idea that Derek's company was built on lies and other people's stolen money. I scrolled through Marcus's recent posts, looking for any sign that he felt guilty about what he'd done to me, but found nothing. Just business updates and carefully curated glimpses of his new life. I closed the app and threw my phone across the room, where it landed with a satisfying thud on the futon. Part of me had hoped that Marcus would realize his mistake and try to make things right, but clearly he'd moved on without a second thought. Derek's funding announcement proved that their scam was working, that they'd found new victims to replace the money they'd stolen from me. The next morning, I woke up with a headache and a determination to stop wallowing. I called Rosa and asked about the studio space Brandon had mentioned. 2 hours later, I was signing a month-to-month lease for 200 square feet of creative workspace in the warehouse. The studio came empty, except for a desk and a drafting table, so I spent my first week there setting up a basic workspace. I bought supplies at a local art store, splurging on good paper and pencils and pretending I wasn't calculating every purchase against my dwindling bank account. Brandon stopped by regularly, ostensibly to check on other artists, but always finding an excuse to chat with me about design theory or Austin architecture. "What are you working on?" he asked one afternoon, finding me surrounded by sketches of small living spaces. Tiny house designs, actually. I keep thinking about affordable housing and how much space people actually need to live comfortably. I showed him a floor plan I'd been refining, a 400 square foot layout that included everything a single person would need. Most tiny houses are designed for Instagram, not for actual living. They look cute, but they're not practical for anyone. Who owns more than 3 shirts? Brandon studied my drawings with obvious interest. "Have you thought about alternative building materials? Something cheaper than traditional construction, but still durable?" "I've been researching shipping container construction, but the insulation issues in Texas climate are problematic." I pulled out another sketch, this one showing a container modification that included external shading and ventilation systems. Plus, there's still the stigma issue. People hear shipping container and think either trendy industrial or poverty housing. Nothing in between. "What if it didn't look like a shipping container?" Brandon asked. "What if you could make it look like a normal small house but use container construction for the structural elements?" We spent the next 3 hours brainstorming, building on each other's ideas in a way that felt completely natural. Brandon understood structural engineering in ways that complemented my spatial design skills, and together we started developing concepts that felt both innovative and practical. It was the first time since leaving Portland that I felt genuinely excited about something. Not just distracted or temporarily entertained, but actually passionate about a project. When Brandon finally left to teach an evening art class, I stayed in the studio until nearly midnight, refining our collaborative designs and researching building codes. Over the following weeks, our professional collaborations started turning into something more personal. Brandon would bring coffee in the mornings and stay to discuss whatever I was working on. We started having lunch together at food trucks around the neighborhood. Conversations ranging from architecture to art to our respective histories of romantic disasters. "I was engaged once too," Brandon told me one afternoon as we sat in a pocket park near the warehouse, eating tacos and watching the Austin skyline shimmer in the heat. 3 years ago. Her name was Kelly, and she was everything I thought I wanted. Successful lawyer, beautiful, came from the kind of family that vacations in Europe every summer. What happened? She wanted me to be someone I wasn't. Kept pushing me to give up the art and focus on serious architecture, the kind that pays well and impresses her friends. Brandon wadded up his taco wrapper and tossed it toward a nearby trash can. The final straw was when she threw away a painting I'd been working on for months, said it was taking up too much space in our apartment and I needed to focus on more practical things. "She threw away your art?" I was horrified. Even at his worst, Marcus had never actively destroyed my work. While I was at a job interview she'd set up for me at her father's firm, I came home excited to tell her about this design I'd presented, and found my painting in the dumpster behind our building. Brandon's voice was matter-of-fact, but I could see the old pain in his eyes. That's when I realized that loving someone means supporting their dreams, not trying to reshape them into your ideal partner. I thought about Marcus and Derek, about how easily Marcus had prioritized Derek's dreams over our shared goals. Sometimes, I think the worst part isn't the betrayal itself. It's realizing how long you were willing to accept being treated like you didn't matter. How long were you with him? 7 years. We met in college, stayed together through all the usual post-graduation chaos. I thought we were building something together, but looking back, I think I was just convenient. Someone stable and supportive while he figured out what he really wanted. Brandon was quiet for a moment, watching a group of musicians set up for an impromptu performance near the park's central fountain. What he did with your money, that wasn't about business or investments. That was about control. He wanted to be the kind of man who could impress his ex with grand gestures, and he was willing to steal from you to do it. The musician's guitar case was filling with donations from passers-by, people contributing whatever they could to support someone else's creative dreams. It was a simple act of faith, trusting that the music was worth the money, that the artist would use it responsibly. I keep thinking about trust, I said. How do you ever know if someone is really who they say they are? Marcus seemed trustworthy for 7 years, and then I found out he'd been lying to me for months. Maybe that's the wrong question, Brandon suggested. Maybe instead of trying to figure out if someone is trustworthy, you just pay attention to how they treat the things that matter to you. Do they respect your work? Do they include you in decisions that affect you? Do they celebrate your successes or try to diminish them? It was such a simple framework, but it cut straight to the heart of everything that had been wrong with my relationship with Marcus. He'd never actively supported my business, just tolerated it. He'd made major financial decisions without consulting me. When I'd gotten my biggest contract, designing the interior for a boutique hotel downtown, he'd responded by complaining about how much time it was taking away from our relationship. "You're right," I said. "I was so focused on the big betrayal that I missed all the smaller ones leading up to it." That evening, back in my studio space, I found myself working on a new type of design project. Instead of houses or apartments, I was sketching community spaces, places where people could gather and create and support each other's dreams. Maker spaces like the warehouse, but designed specifically for collaboration between different types of artists and craftspeople. Brandon knocked on my studio door around 8 o'clock, carrying takeout containers from our favorite Thai restaurant. "Thought you might be hungry. You've been here for 12 hours straight." "Have I?" I looked up from my drafting table, surprised to see that darkness had fallen outside the windows. "I guess I lost track of time." He set the food on my desk and peered at my latest drawings. "These are incredible, Lily. What inspired this?" "Your housing project, actually." I started thinking about how affordable housing isn't just about the physical structures. It's about creating communities where people can support each other. I showed him the central community space I'd designed, with areas for different types of creative work and collaboration. What if affordable housing included maker spaces and shared commercial kitchens and places where residents could start small businesses? Brandon studied the drawings with growing excitement. This could actually work. If residents could generate income through creative work, they'd be able to afford higher rents, which would make the development financially sustainable. We spent dinner brainstorming ways to make the concept practical, researching funding sources and zoning requirements. It felt like the kind of work I'd always wanted to do, designing spaces that could actually improve people's lives instead of just looking impressive in magazine spreads. "There's a city planning meeting next week about affordable housing initiatives," Brandon said as we cleaned up the empty takeout containers. "They're looking for community input on new development guidelines. You should present this concept." The idea terrified me. I'd spent weeks hiding in Austin, avoiding anything that required me to put myself out there professionally. But looking at the designs spread across my drafting table, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: pride in my work. "I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of visibility," I said honestly. "What's the worst that could happen? They say no, and you're exactly where you are right now." Brandon gathered up my drawings and stacked them neatly. "But what if they say yes? What if this is the beginning of something amazing?" Later that night, alone in my tiny apartment, I video-called Amanda to catch up on Portland news and show her my latest work. She answered from her home office, looking tired but pleased to see me. "You look different," she said immediately. "Healthier. Like you're actually sleeping." I am sleeping, and eating regularly, and working on projects that don't make me want to throw my laptop out the window. I angled my phone so she could see some of the sketches I'd brought home. "What do you think of these?" Amanda leaned closer to her screen, examining my community-focused housing designs. "Lily, these are brilliant. This is the kind of work you've always talked about wanting to do." Brandon thinks I should present them at a city planning meeting next week. Brandon? Amanda's eyebrows shot up with interest. Who's Brandon? I found myself blushing as I described my collaboration with Brandon, the way our professional partnership had developed into friendship and maybe something more. Amanda listened with growing amusement, occasionally making encouraging noises, when I paused. So let me get this straight, she said when I finished. You've been in Austin for 6 weeks. You've started a creative collaboration with a gorgeous architect who shares your values. You're doing the most innovative work of your career, and you're worried about presenting to the city council? When you put it like that, it sounds kind of ridiculous. It sounds like you're finally becoming the person you were meant to be before Marcus convinced you to play it safe. Amanda's expression turned serious. Lily, I need to tell you something about what's been happening here. My stomach clenched. What kind of something? Marcus has been calling the studio trying to reach you. I told him you were unavailable, but he's been persistent. He also showed up at my house last week. What did he want? He says Derek's company is in trouble. Something about the SEC investigating their business practices. Marcus claims he wants to return your money and work things out. I felt a cold satisfaction at the news about Derek's company, but Marcus's sudden desire for reconciliation didn't surprise me. Let me guess. He only wants to make things right, now that his brilliant investment is falling apart. That's what I figured. But Lily, there's something else. I did some research on Innovation Edge Solutions after Marcus's visit. They're not just in trouble with the SEC, they're being sued by multiple investors for fraud. The company's probably going to be shut down within the next few months, which meant that Derek's promises about quick returns and profitable exits had been lies from the beginning. Marcus had stolen our money for a company that was already circling the drain. Are you going to try to get your money back? Amanda asked gently. I looked around my tiny studio apartment, at the simple life I'd built in Austin, at the sketches for community housing that represented work I actually cared about. The money Marcus had stolen would have bought me a house in Portland, and a wedding that made other people happy, but losing it had forced me to figure out what I actually wanted from life. Maybe eventually, I said, but right now, I'm more interested in moving forward than looking backward. After we hung up, I sat on my futon with my laptop, researching the city planning meeting Brandon had mentioned. The agenda included presentations from developers, architects, and community advocacy groups, all discussing Austin's affordable housing crisis. My community-focused design concept could fit perfectly into their ongoing conversation. For the first time since burning my marriage license, I felt ready to step back into the world as Lily Rodriguez, designer and creator, rather than Lily Rodriguez, victim of financial fraud. Whatever came next, I was going to build it myself. The Austin City Council chambers buzzed with nervous energy as I arranged my presentation materials on the small table provided for speakers. 3 months in Texas had given me a light tan and a confidence I hadn't possessed since my Portland days, but standing in front of the microphone still made my palms sweat. Brandon sat in the audience, offering an encouraging smile whenever I glanced his way. Next speaker is Lily Rodriguez, representing Elevated Spaces Design Collective, announced Councilwoman Martinez, reading from her tablet. Ms. Rodriguez, you have 5 minutes to present your affordable housing proposal. I approached the podium with my portfolio tucked under my arm, acutely aware that this presentation could change everything. The past month had been a whirlwind of research, design refinements, and late-night strategy sessions with Brandon. Together, we developed a comprehensive proposal for community-integrated affordable housing that addressed Austin's growing displacement crisis. Thank you, Councilwoman Martinez, members of the council, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. 3 months ago, I moved to Austin as someone who'd lost faith in the possibility of authentic community. Today, I'm here to propose a housing model that doesn't just provide shelter, but creates spaces where residents can build sustainable livelihoods and genuine connections. I clicked to my first slide, a rendering of our proposed development that showed small, efficient living units surrounding shared community spaces. Traditional affordable housing fails because it isolates low-income residents in buildings that offer no opportunities for economic mobility. Our model integrates makerspaces, commercial kitchens, and flexible work areas that allow residents to generate income while building community wealth. The council members leaned forward with obvious interest as I walked them through the financial projections Brandon and I had developed. By including revenue-generating community spaces, Residents could potentially earn enough to cover higher rents, making the development self-sustaining without long-term government subsidies. The key innovation is treating housing as part of an ecosystem rather than simply as individual units, I continued, clicking to a detailed floor plan. Each apartment is designed for maximum efficiency, but the real living happens in shared spaces that encourage collaboration and mutual support. Councilman Thompson raised his hand. Ms. Rodriguez, this looks impressive, but do you have any practical experience with this type of development? What's your background in affordable housing specifically? The question I'd been dreading. How do you explain that your expertise comes from months of living in tiny spaces and observing how creative communities function? That your most relevant experience is being financially devastated and having to rebuild from nothing? My background is in interior design, with a focus on maximizing functionality in small spaces, I said carefully. But my real qualification for this project is that I've lived the displacement experience Austin's housing crisis creates. I know what it feels like to have your life plans destroyed by circumstances beyond your control, and I know how important community support becomes when you're starting over. The honesty seemed to resonate with several council members. Councilwoman Martinez nodded approvingly as I continued explaining the project's community-building aspects. We've also partnered with local organizations to provide residents with business development support, I added, gesturing toward the section of the audience where representatives from the East Austin Community Land Trust and the Texas Small Business Development Center were seated. This isn't just housing. It's a launching pad for economic stability. When I finished my presentation, the questions came quickly. Council members wanted to know about construction costs, zoning requirements, and maintenance responsibilities. Brandon had helped me prepare for most of these, and I found myself answering with confidence I didn't know I possessed. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need, said Councilwoman Rodriguez after the formal question period ended. I'd like to schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss potential pilot sites. Can you have a more detailed proposal ready within 2 weeks? Walking out of the chambers an hour later, I felt like I was floating. Brandon wrapped me in a congratulatory hug that lingered just long enough to make my heart race, and several audience members approached to exchange contact information and offer their support for the project. I can't believe that actually happened, I said as we walked toward Brandon's truck, my presentation materials clutched against my chest like a shield. I can, Brandon replied, opening the passenger door for me. You were incredible in there. The way you handled Councilman Thompson's skepticism, the passion in your voice when you talked about community building. That wasn't just a housing presentation. That was a vision for how cities can actually work for people instead of against them. We drove to our favorite food truck for celebratory tacos, but I found myself too excited to eat much. My phone had been buzzing constantly since leaving the council chambers. Messages from audience members who wanted to learn more about the project and local organizations interested in collaboration. There's something I need to tell you, Brandon said as we sat at a picnic table in the food truck park, watching the sun set over Austin's skyline. I submitted our housing proposal to the Sustainable Communities Fellowship competition last week. I nearly choked on my agua fresca. You did what? It's a national competition for innovative housing solutions. The winners get $100,000 in seed funding and a year-long mentorship program with some of the country's leading sustainable development experts. Brandon looked nervous, like he wasn't sure how I'd react to his initiative. I should have asked you first, but the deadline was coming up, and I thought we had a real chance. Brandon, that's incredible, I said, though part of me felt overwhelmed by the implications. When do they announce the winners? Finalists are selected next month with final presentations in January. If we make it to the final round, we'd present to a panel of judges in San Francisco. San Francisco. The possibility of national recognition for our work felt surreal. 3 months ago, I'd been a failed fiancé running away from Portland with my life in ruins. Now I was potentially on the verge of presenting innovative housing solutions to experts who could help us actually build something meaningful. My phone rang just as we were throwing away our trash, Amanda's name appearing on the screen. I almost declined the call, wanting to hold on to the day's magic a little longer, but something about the timing made me answer. Lily. Amanda's voice was tight with urgency. I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it. My stomach dropped. What happened? Marcus and Derek are in Austin. They're looking for you. The food truck park suddenly felt too exposed, too public. Brandon noticed my expression change and stepped closer, ready to offer support without knowing what was wrong. "How do you know they're there?" I asked, walking toward a quieter corner of the park. "Marcus called the studio this morning, claiming he was in Austin on business and wanted to surprise you. When I told him I wasn't giving out your personal information, he got aggressive. Started talking about how you'd stolen community property. When you left Portland, and how Derek's lawyers might need to get involved. Community property? We weren't married, and I didn't take anything that belonged to him. I know that, and you know that. But apparently, Derek has convinced Marcus that you owe them something. Marcus also mentioned that he knew you were working on housing projects and presenting to the city council." Ice shot through my veins. How could he possibly know that? "I don't know. But Lily, I think they're planning to disrupt whatever you're building there." Marcus sounded desperate, and desperate people do stupid things. After I hung up, Brandon listened quietly as I explained the situation. His jaw tightened with anger when I described Derek's threats about lawyers and community property. "They can't just show up here and harass you," he said firmly. "You left Portland to get away from their drama." "You don't understand how persuasive Derek can be," I replied, scanning the park nervously, as if Marcus might materialize from behind a food truck. "He's probably convinced Marcus that I'm the villain in this story, that everything that went wrong was somehow my fault." That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside my apartment made me jump, expecting to hear Marcus's voice or Derek's manipulative charm echoing up from the street. I kept thinking about the council presentation, about the momentum Brandon and I had built, about the possibility that Derek could somehow poison the well before our housing project had a chance to succeed. The next morning brought confirmation of my worst fears. I arrived at the warehouse to find Marcus and Derek waiting in the lobby, both of them wearing the kind of expensive casual clothes that screamed successful entrepreneur. Derek looked exactly the same as he had in Portland, still radiating that practiced confidence that made people want to trust him. Marcus looked older, more haggard, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well, either. "Lily," Marcus said, standing up from the lobby's vintage couch. "You look good. Austin obviously agrees with you." I ignored him and addressed Derek directly. "What are you doing here?" "We came to talk," Derek said smoothly, "to clear up some misunderstandings and discuss a business opportunity that might interest you." "I'm not interested in anything you have to offer. Not even getting your money back?" Derek's smile was sharp, predatory, because that's exactly what we're prepared to do. Despite my better judgment, I found myself curious. "What's the catch?" Marcus stepped forward, his voice taking on the pleading tone I remembered from our last fight in Portland. "There is no catch, Lily. Derek's company is pivoting, focusing on sustainable development projects instead of pure tech. When we heard about your housing work here, we realized we could help each other." "You want to invest in my housing project," I said slowly, understanding dawning. "We want to partner with you," Derek corrected. "Innovation Edge has connections with venture capital firms that specialize in social impact investing. We could provide the funding and business expertise you need to scale your concept nationally." The offer was tempting, I had to admit. Brandon and I had spent weeks worrying about funding and wondering how to turn our Austin pilot project into something bigger. Derek was dangling exactly what we needed most, wrapped in the promise of recovering the money Marcus had stolen. And in exchange? In exchange, Innovation Edge becomes the primary development partner for all future projects. We handle the business side, you handle the design side, everyone wins. Derek's voice was honey smooth, the same tone he'd probably used to convince Marcus to steal my money in the first place. "What about the SEC investigation?" I asked. "What about the investor lawsuits?" Derek's smile flickered for just a moment before reasserting itself. "Minor regulatory issues that we're confident will be resolved soon. The important thing is that we're moving the company in a new direction, focusing on projects that actually make a difference." Brandon's voice came from behind me, cold and steady. "The important thing is that you're trying to buy your way out of legal trouble by attaching yourself to legitimate projects." I turned to see him approaching from the elevator, his artist's eye taking in every detail of Marcus and Derek's expensive clothes and practice charm. The contrast between Brandon's paint-stained authenticity and their polished manipulation was stark. "You must be Brandon," Derek said, extending his hand with that automatic confidence. "Marcus has told me so much about your work together. Very impressive stuff." Brandon ignored the offered handshake. "Funny, because Lily's told me plenty about your work too. Financial fraud, investor lawsuits, SEC investigations. Really impressive resume." The tension in the lobby was thick enough to cut. Other warehouse artists were starting to notice the confrontation, and I could see Rosa approaching from her office with a concerned expression. "Perhaps we should take this conversation somewhere more private," Derek suggested, his voice remaining calm despite Brandon's obvious hostility. "There's nothing private about it," I said, my own voice gaining strength. "You came here to make an offer, so make it, publicly. Let everyone hear exactly what Innovation Edge Solutions is proposing." Derek's smile finally faltered as he realized he'd lost control of the situation. Marcus looked increasingly uncomfortable, glancing between Derek and me like he was watching a tennis match. "Fine," Derek said. "We're offering to return the $47,000 Marcus invested, plus additional funding for your housing project, in exchange for development partnership rights." "The $47,000 Marcus stole," I corrected. "And how exactly do you plan to return money that your company spent months ago?" "We have new investors," Marcus said quickly. "Derek secured additional funding last week." Brandon laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Let me guess. You found some new marks who don't know about the lawsuits yet." "Our funding sources are completely legitimate," Derek said, his voice taking on an edge for the first time. "Prove it," I challenged. "Show me bank statements. Show me contracts with these mystery investors. Show me anything that proves you actually have the money you're promising." Derek and Marcus exchanged a look that told me everything I needed to know. They were bluffing, hoping I'd accept their partnership offer without demanding proof of their financial backing. "We can provide documentation once you've committed to the partnership," Derek said carefully. "So you want me to sign a business agreement with you before you prove you can actually fulfill your end of the deal?" Shook my head. That's exactly the kind of thinking that got Marcus into trouble in the first place. Rosa had reached our group by now, her presence adding another layer of witness to Derek's discomfort. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her tone making it clear that any problems would result in immediate eviction from her building. "No problem," I said firmly. "These gentlemen were just leaving." Derek made one last attempt to regain control. "Lily, you're making a mistake. Innovation Edge has the resources and connections to make your housing project a national success. Without proper business backing, you'll never be able to scale beyond Austin." "Maybe not," I agreed. "But at least I'll own whatever I do build. At least I'll be able to sleep at night knowing I didn't build my success on stolen money and lies." Marcus stepped forward, his voice desperate. "Lily, please. I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. We can build something together." "We?" I looked at him with something approaching pity. "Marcus, there is no we anymore. You chose Derek over me months ago. Now you get to live with that choice." "I chose the future over the past," Marcus said, his voice rising. "I chose ambition over playing it safe." "You chose deception over honesty," I replied. "You chose someone else's dreams over our partnership. And now you're here trying to manipulate me into bailing you out of the consequences." Derek placed a restraining hand on Marcus's arm, probably recognizing that his partner was about to say something that would make their situation worse. "This offer won't remain open indefinitely," Derek said, switching tactics to implied threats. "The affordable housing market is about to become very competitive. It would be unfortunate if you found yourself struggling against better-funded competition." Brandon stepped closer to me, a show of solidarity that wasn't lost on anyone present. "Are you threatening her?" "I'm pointing out market realities," Derek said smoothly. "But perhaps you're right. Perhaps this conversation would be better continued in a more formal setting, with lawyers present to ensure everyone understands their obligations." "The only obligation anyone has here is for you to leave," Rosa interjected, her authority, as building owner, clear in her voice. Now, Derek and Marcus had no choice but to comply, but Derek paused at the lobby door for one final comment. "Lily, you're making an emotional decision. When you're ready to think about this rationally, you know how to reach us. The same condescending language he'd used in Portland, designed to make me doubt my own judgment. But 3 months of rebuilding my confidence had immunized me against his manipulation. I am thinking rationally, I said. Rationally enough to recognize a bad deal when I see one. After they left, I found myself shaking with adrenaline and anger. Brandon wrapped his arms around me, offering the kind of solid support I'd forgotten was possible. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. "I'm better than okay," I realized, surprising myself with the truth of it. 3 months ago, that conversation would have left me questioning everything. Now I just feel sorry for them. Rosa approached with 2 cups of coffee from the lobby machine, her expression sympathetic. "Old business partners?" "Ex-fiancé and the man he left me for," I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "They stole money from me, and now they want to buy their way back into my life." "Honey," Rosa said with the wisdom of someone who'd seen plenty of human drama. "When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Those boys showed their true colors in Portland. Don't let them convince you they've changed just because they need something from you." That afternoon, Brandon and I worked in my studio space, refining our housing proposal for the detailed presentation the city council had requested. The encounter with Marcus and Derek had actually clarified something important for me. I didn't want to build something that could be bought or corrupted by people like them. I wanted to create housing that served communities, not investors. "What if we structure it as a community land trust?" I suggested, looking up from the financial projections I'd been revising. "That way, even if the project is successful, it can't be bought out by developers who want to flip it for profit." Brandon nodded enthusiastically. "That's brilliant. It would protect the affordability and perpetuity and give residents real ownership in their community." As we worked, I found myself thinking about the path that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd been planning a wedding to a man who valued Derek's approval more than my trust. I'd been running a successful but ultimately unfulfilling design business, creating beautiful spaces for wealthy clients while ignoring my own desire to make a broader impact. Losing Marcus and my money had felt like the end of everything, but it had actually been the beginning of discovering who I was when I wasn't trying to fit into someone else's vision of my life. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Offer expires tomorrow. Don't let pride cost you everything you've worked for. Derek." I showed the message to Brandon, who rolled his eyes. He really thinks he's still in control of this situation. "Let him think that," I said, deleting the message without responding. "Tomorrow, I'm going to do something that will make it very clear exactly who's in control." That something turned out to be calling a press conference. Austin's affordable housing crisis had made my city council presentation newsworthy, and I'd been contacted by several local reporters interested in following up on the story. Now I had a different story to tell. The next morning, I stood in front of the warehouse where I'd rebuilt my life, flanked by Brandon and representatives from the community organizations supporting our housing project. Local news cameras captured every word as I explained how 2 men from Portland were trying to buy their way into Austin's affordable housing conversation, using money obtained through investor fraud. "Innovation Edge Solutions has no legitimate business in Austin," I said clearly, looking directly into the camera. "They're not here to support affordable housing. They're here to clean up their reputation by attaching themselves to legitimate community development work." I provided the reporters with documentation of Derek's SEC troubles and the investor lawsuits his company faced. By noon, the story was trending on local news websites. By evening, it had been picked up by Portland media, complete with details about the money Marcus had stolen from our joint account. Marcus called that night, his voice shaking with anger. "You've destroyed everything, Lily. Derek's investors are pulling out. The company is finished." "Good," I said simply, and hung up. 3 days later, Amanda called with an update from Portland. Innovation Edge Solutions had officially shut down, and Derek was facing criminal charges for securities fraud. Marcus had been questioned by investigators but wasn't being charged, probably because he'd been Derek's victim as much as his accomplice. "He's been calling the studio constantly," Amanda reported, "wanting to know if you'll talk to him. I think the reality of Derek's situation has finally hit him." "And what did you tell him?" "I told him that bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt by the same people who lit the match. As winter settled over Austin, Brandon and I received notification that our housing proposal had been selected as a finalist for the Sustainable Communities Fellowship. We'd be presenting to the judges in San Francisco in January, competing against teams from across the country for funding that could turn our pilot project into a national model. But more important than any potential award was the realization that I'd found my purpose. Not just designing beautiful spaces, but creating communities where people could build authentic, sustainable lives. And I'd found a partner who shared that vision, someone who saw my work as essential rather than inconvenient. The money Marcus had stolen was gone forever, but it had bought me something more valuable than a house in Portland, or a wedding that would have made other people happy. It had bought me the chance to discover who Lily Rodriguez really was when she stopped trying to be who everyone else wanted her to be. The courtroom in Portland felt smaller than I remembered. But then again, I was no longer the broken woman who'd fled the city 8 months ago. I sat in the gallery watching Marcus squirm in the witness box, his lawyer objecting repeatedly as the prosecutor methodically dismantled Derek's defense. The federal case against Innovation Edge Solutions had expanded to include multiple counts of securities fraud, and Marcus had been granted immunity in exchange for his testimony against his former business partner. "Mr. Thompson," the prosecutor said, consulting her notes, "when you transferred $47,000 from your joint account with Ms. Rodriguez to Innovation Edge Solutions, did Mr. Walsh inform you that his company was already under SEC investigation?" Marcus's voice was barely audible. "No, he did not." "Did he inform you that 3 previous investors were already pursuing legal action against the company for misrepresentation?" "No." "Did he inform you that the app Innovation Edge was developing had already been rejected by multiple potential buyers due to functionality issues?" "No." Marcus looked across the courtroom, his eyes finding mine for a brief moment before darting away. "He told me it was a guaranteed success. He said we'd triple our investment within 6 months." I felt Brandon's hand find mine as we watched the final destruction of Derek's carefully constructed lies. The prosecution had built an airtight case, complete with internal company emails showing Derek knew his projections were fraudulent when he solicited investments from Marcus and others. Derek himself sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, his courtroom-issued clothes a far cry from the expensive suits he'd worn while charming investors. His lawyer had attempted to paint him as an overly optimistic entrepreneur rather than a deliberate fraud, but the evidence was overwhelming. "Your Honor," the prosecutor concluded her closing argument, "the defendant systematically deceived investors, misappropriated funds, and attempted to cover up his crimes when his company began to fail. He showed a pattern of predatory behavior that destroyed multiple families' financial security. The government requests the maximum sentence to send a clear message that financial fraud will not be tolerated." The judge retired for deliberation, and I found myself in the courthouse hallway face to face with Marcus for the first time since Austin. He looked exhausted, older than his 31 years, wearing a cheap suit that emphasized how far he'd fallen from his real estate developer days. "Lily," he said quietly, glancing nervously at Brandon, who stood protectively beside me. "I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I need to apologize for everything." "You're right," I said calmly. "I don't want to hear it. Your apology doesn't change anything." "I lost everything too," Marcus continued desperately. "My business, my reputation, my savings. Derek convinced me to invest more than just your money. I mortgaged everything I owned." Brandon stepped forward, his voice cold. "And whose fault is that?" Marcus ignored him, focusing entirely on me. "I know I can't undo what I did, but maybe we could start over. I've learned from my mistakes. I know what really matters now." The audacity of it took my breath away. Even now, even after everything, Marcus thought he could manipulate me back into his life by playing the victim card. "What really matters," I said slowly, "is that I'm happy. Genuinely, completely happy for the first time in years. I have work that fulfills me, a partner who respects me, and a future I'm excited about. You gave me the greatest gift possible when you stole that money." Marcus looked confused. "What gift?" "You forced me to discover who I am when I'm not trying to be what you need me to be." I looked at this man I'd once planned to marry and felt nothing but pity. I hope you find that for yourself someday, but you won't find it with me. The bailiff called us back into the courtroom, where the judge delivered Derek's sentence. 7 years in federal prison, plus restitution to be paid to all identified victims. Marcus would receive his own sentence for his cooperation, but it would likely be limited to probation and community service. As we left the courthouse, Amanda Chen was waiting on the steps with a bottle of champagne and a huge smile. She'd flown in from Portland specifically for the sentencing, claiming she needed to see Derek get his comeuppance in person. "Justice served," she said, popping the cork as photographers from local news stations captured the moment. "How does it feel to watch your ex-fiancé's boyfriend get hauled off to federal prison?" "Anticlimactic, honestly," I said, accepting a plastic cup of champagne. "The real victory happened months ago when I realized I didn't need their money back to rebuild my life." Brandon wrapped his arm around my waist, and I leaned into his warmth. "Speaking of rebuilding, we have news." Amanda raised her eyebrows expectantly as I pulled out my phone to show her the email that had arrived that morning. The Sustainable Communities Fellowship had announced its winners, and our Austin housing project had taken first place. Along with the $100,000 in seed funding came a partnership with the National Community Development Corporation and commitments from 3 cities to pilot our community-integrated housing model. "Lily, this is incredible," Amanda breathed, reading over the details. "You're going to be designing affordable housing projects across the country." "We're going to be designing them," I corrected, glancing at Brandon. "This is a partnership in every sense of the word." The celebration dinner that night was held at Le Pigeon, one of Portland's most celebrated restaurants. Amanda had insisted on paying, claiming it was the least she could do after watching me rise from the ashes like a phoenix with better taste in men. The dining room was elegant and intimate, filled with the kind of sophisticated atmosphere I'd once thought represented success. Now I realized that real success wasn't about impressing other people or meeting their expectations. It was about creating something meaningful and sharing it with people who valued your contributions. "I have a confession," Brandon said as we shared a dessert course that cost more than I'd spent on groceries during my first month in Austin. "I've been carrying something around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, my heart stuttering as Amanda let out a delighted gasp. But when he opened it, instead of an engagement ring, it contained a key. "It's the key to the warehouse studio next to yours," he explained, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "I bought out the lease from the jewelry maker who was renting it. I thought maybe we could knock down the wall between them, create a proper, collaborative workspace for Elevated Spaces Design Collective." I stared at the key, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. Marcus had proposed to me with a ring that cost 3 months' salary, a symbol of ownership rather than partnership. Brandon was offering me space to grow, room to expand, my vision without losing my independence. "There's more," he continued, looking suddenly nervous. "I know it's presumptuous, but I had some preliminary drawings done for how we could configure the space. Only if you're interested, of course." He pulled out his phone and showed me architectural sketches of our 2 studios combined into one flowing workspace, with separate areas for different types of design work but shared conference and presentation spaces. It was exactly what I would have designed myself if I'd had the courage to dream that big. "It's perfect," I said, leaning across the table to kiss him as Amanda applauded and other diners turned to stare. "Absolutely perfect." The flight back to Austin the next day felt like a homecoming in ways that returning to Portland never could. As we descended through the clouds, I could see the city sprawling below us, all that growth and potential and creative energy that had given me space to reinvent myself. From the airplane window, I spotted the warehouse district where our expanded studio would be, the downtown area where we'd presented to the city council, the neighborhoods where our first pilot housing project would break ground next spring. "Any regrets?" Brandon asked, following my gaze out the window. "About what?" "About not trying to get your money back through the courts. The judge said you could file a civil suit for the full amount plus damages." I considered it for a moment. The $47,000 Derek and Marcus had stolen would be enough to buy a house in Austin, maybe start a proper design firm with employees and fancy equipment. But pursuing it would mean months of legal proceedings, depositions, and reliving the worst period of my life. No regrets, I said firmly. That money bought me something more valuable than a house or a wedding. It bought me the chance to discover what I'm actually capable of when I stop playing it safe. And what are you capable of? I smiled, thinking about the projects stretching ahead of us, the communities we'd help create, the lives we might impact through thoughtful design and genuine partnership. I guess we're about to find out. 3 weeks later, I stood in our newly renovated studio space, watching workers install the last of the glass partitions that would separate our collaborative workspace from the client meeting area. The expansion had been funded partly by our fellowship award and partly by deposits from the 3 cities that wanted to pilot our housing model. Rosa had given us the friends and family rate on construction costs, claiming that watching my transformation had been worth the discount. The studio was everything I'd dreamed of during those first desperate weeks in Austin. Open and light-filled, with space for Brandon's architectural work and my interior design projects, plus room for the community planning sessions that had become central to our approach. We'd even included a small presentation area where we could host the monthly forums we'd started for Austin residents to discuss housing and development issues. Amanda had decided to relocate from Portland, selling her share of Bloom & Co. to join our partnership as business development director. She'd arrived 2 days earlier with a U-Haul full of furniture and an infectious enthusiasm for what we were building together. "The Phoenix mayor's office called while you were at lunch," she reported, consulting her tablet as I surveyed our progress. "They want to schedule a site visit for next month to discuss adapting our model for desert construction. Also, that reporter from Architectural Digest wants to do a feature story on community-integrated design." A year ago, I was burning my marriage license in my backyard, I mused. Now Architectural Digest wants to interview me about innovative housing solutions. Life is weird. "Life is what happens when you stop letting other people define your worth," Amanda corrected. "Speaking of which, your ex-fiancé left another voicemail." I was surprised to feel nothing at the mention of Marcus. Not anger, not sadness, not even curiosity about what he might want. "Delete it," I said. "Whatever he has to say, I'm not interested." "Already done. But Lily, I need to ask you something." Amanda set down her tablet and looked at me seriously. "Are you happy? Really, truly happy? Because you've been through so much trauma, and sometimes people convince themselves they're fine when they're really just running from their problems." I considered her question carefully. Was I happy, or was I just successful? Was I genuinely content, or was I using work and Brandon in the studio as elaborate distractions from deeper issues? "I'm happy," I said finally, and knew it was true. Not perfect, not without problems, but genuinely satisfied with my life in ways I never was with Marcus. I wake up excited about work. I go to sleep feeling like I accomplished something meaningful. I have a partner who supports my dreams instead of trying to reshape them into his vision. And the money? Do you ever think about what you could have done with that $47,000? Every day, I admitted, but not with regret, with gratitude. That money funded Derek's lies for a few months, but losing it forced me to build something real. If Marcus hadn't stolen it, I'd probably be living in some Portland suburb right now, married to a man I didn't really trust, running a business that bored me. I'd have financial security, but no authentic happiness. Amanda nodded approvingly. "That's the healthiest thing I've ever heard you say about this whole situation." That evening, Brandon and I walked through the East Austin neighborhood where our first housing project would be built. The lot was currently empty except for a few old foundation stones and some volunteer wildflowers. But we could envision the community that would rise there. 24 affordable housing units surrounding shared spaces where residents could start businesses, hold community meetings, and build the kinds of relationships that create genuine security. "Nervous about breaking ground next month?" Brandon asked as we stood where the central community space would be located. "Terrified," I said honestly. "What if it doesn't work? What if the community spaces sit empty? What if we've designed something that looks good on paper but doesn't function for real people? Then we'll learn from our mistakes and design something better next time." Brandon pulled me closer, and I breathed in the scent of sawdust and paint that had become my favorite cologne. "But I don't think that's going to happen. You have an instinct for what people need, Lily. It's what made Bloom & Co. successful, and it's what makes our partnership work. We walked back toward the warehouse as the sun set over Austin's skyline, casting long shadows across the construction sites and food trucks that defined the city's relentless growth. My phone buzzed with a text from Rosa, asking if we wanted to join her and some other artists for drinks at the bar downstairs, but I declined. I was exactly where I wanted to be, with exactly the person I wanted to be with, planning exactly the future I wanted to create. 9 months ago, I'd stood in my Portland backyard feeding 7 years of plans into a fire pit, watching my entire life dissolve into smoke and ash. I'd thought I was ending something, destroying the foundation of everything I'd built. Instead, I'd been clearing space for something better to grow. The morning of our groundbreaking ceremony dawned clear and bright, with the kind of crisp December weather that made Austin feel like the most perfect city in the world. Representatives from all 3 pilot cities were in attendance, along with local officials, community members, and media outlets covering our innovative approach to affordable housing. I stood at the podium with a ceremonial shovel in my hands, looking out at the crowd of people who'd helped make this moment possible. Amanda and Rosa and Brandon, of course, but also the East Austin Community Land Trust representatives who'd helped us navigate zoning requirements, the city council members who'd taken a chance on an unknown designer from Portland, the residents who'd participated in our community planning sessions and helped shape the final design. 8 months ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly. Across the construction site, I came to Austin as someone who'd lost faith in the possibility of authentic partnership. I'd been betrayed by someone I trusted, financially devastated, and convinced that building anything meaningful required compromising my values. I paused, looking directly at the cameras that would carry this message beyond Austin. Somewhere, Marcus might be watching. Derek certainly wouldn't be, since federal prisoners had limited internet access, but maybe his story would serve as a warning to other people tempted to build their dreams on stolen foundations. This project exists because I learned that real security doesn't come from protecting what you have. It comes from building something so meaningful that losing it would be impossible, because it belongs to an entire community rather than just to you. I lifted the shovel and broke ground on the first Elevated Spaces community housing project, dirt flying as the crowd applauded and photographers captured the moment. Brandon joined me for the second shovelful, then Amanda, then Rosa, then representatives from each of the community organizations that had supported our work. By the time we'd finished the ceremony, dozens of people had participated in the groundbreaking, each of them claiming ownership of a project that would house families, nurture small businesses, and prove that affordable housing could be beautiful, functional, and economically sustainable. Walking back to our truck afterward, I realized that this was what happiness felt like. Not the frantic joy of achieving someone else's definition of success, but the quiet satisfaction of creating something that aligned with my deepest values. Not the desperate relief of avoiding disaster, but the confident pleasure of building toward a future I genuinely wanted. My phone buzzed with a congratulatory text from my mother, who'd driven down from Dallas for the ceremony. Below it was a message from an unknown number that I almost deleted before recognizing the Portland area code. Saw the news coverage of your housing project. You look happy. I'm glad you found what you were looking for. M. I showed the message to Brandon, who raised an eyebrow. Are you going to respond? I considered it for a moment, then deleted the message without replying. Marcus had made his choices, and I'd made mine. There was nothing left to say between us, no bridge worth rebuilding, no shared future worth discussing. Instead, I opened my camera app and took a selfie with Brandon against the backdrop of our construction site, both of us grinning and covered in ceremonial dirt. I posted it to Instagram with a simple caption, "Building something beautiful." Within an hour, it had dozens of likes and comments from friends, colleagues, and strangers who'd followed our story. People offering congratulations, sharing their own housing struggles, asking questions about our design process. The post became a conversation about community, sustainability, and the possibility of creating spaces where people could thrive, rather than just survive. That night, Brandon and I lay in bed in my tiny studio apartment, planning our move to the larger place we'd found near the construction site. In 6 months, we'd be living in our own community-integrated housing, testing Our theories about shared spaces and sustainable living alongside the residents whose input had shaped the final design. Any regrets about how we got here? Brandon asked, echoing his question from months earlier. I thought about Marcus and Derek, probably lying in their respective beds, wondering how their brilliant schemes had led to criminal charges and financial ruin. I thought about the $47,000 that had seemed so important 8 months ago. Money that had funded a few months of Derek's lies before disappearing entirely. Not a single one, I said, and meant it completely. The woman who'd planned to marry Marcus Thompson had been smaller than her dreams, willing to accept security over authenticity, partnership over passion. She'd built a successful business by playing it safe, designing beautiful spaces for other people while never quite figuring out what she wanted for herself. Lily Rodriguez, community developer and social entrepreneur, was building something bigger than any individual project. She was proving that affordable housing could be beautiful, that business could be ethical, that partnerships could be genuinely equal. She was creating spaces where people could build the kinds of lives they actually wanted instead of just the ones they could afford. And she was doing it all with someone who saw her work as essential rather than inconvenient, someone who celebrated her successes instead of trying to diminish them, someone who'd rather hold her hand while she changed the world than steal her money to fund someone else's fantasies. Outside our window, Austin hummed with the energy of a city constantly becoming something new, full of people chasing dreams and building futures, and proving that starting over wasn't just possible, but necessary. In a few hours, the sun would rise on another day of construction, another step toward creating communities where authentic happiness was affordable for everyone. I fell asleep planning our next project, already dreaming of the spaces we'd design and the lives we'd help improve, grateful for every burned bridge that had led me to this moment of building something better from the ground up. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.